Okay, here's your warm-up help for week 10. Remember, copy the problems down just like I'm doing and turn it into me by Tuesday. So the first problem, number 1, was a subtraction and adding problem. So the first thing I'm going to do, is I like to line up my decimals. I like to add my 0. Now I can go ahead and start subtracting. Well, I know I cannot subtract 3 from 0, so I have to borrow. It becomes a 1. That becomes a 10. So 10 minus 3 is 7. I cannot subtract 6 from 1, so I have to borrow. That becomes a 5. That becomes an 11. And now I can subtract 6 minus 11, which is 5, and then 5 minus 0, which is 5. Then I'm going to add my 7, and remember there's a decimal behind the 7. So I need to line up my decimals, and at this point I just add, and that's where I get the 12 and 57 hundredths. Okay, number 2 was a subtraction problem. Again, I like to put my decimals so I don't forget about them. I just line up my decimals, so I'm going to say 79 minus 40 first. And then I'm going to take my answer, 39, and subtract the 12 from it, and that's where I get my 27. So that's number 2. Number 4, I am dividing my decimal, so I got to make sure I set it in the correct box. Like that. I do not have a decimal for the 4, it's behind it, so I just move it up to my quotient. And now I divide. 4 goes into 7 one time. Subtract. Bring down. 4 goes into 32 8 times. It terminates, so my answer is 1 and 8/10. Okay, number 5 was 2/5 plus 6/7. I have to find a common denominator, which I chose 35. So I know that 5 times 7 is 35, so 2 times 7 is 14, equivalent fractions. 7 times 5 is 35, so 6 times 5 is 30. Equivalent fractions. Now that I got the same denominator, I can go ahead and add. 14 plus 30 is 44. 44 over 35 is an improper. So I'm going to go ahead and divide it. 35 will not go into 4, but 35 will go into 44 one time, with 9 left over, and remember I go clockwise. So my answer is 1 and 9/35. Number 6, I did for every class. I showed you how to do it. Some people changed it impropers, but remember you got to make common denominators. I went ahead and did that for everyone, so hopefully you know the answer was 7/12. So if you have a question, let me know. Okay, number 7 was multiplication of fractions. I don't need a common denominator. I just multiply. 7 times 2 is 14. 5 times 3 is 15. It's already in simplest form, so that is my answer. Number 8, I'm dividing fractions. Remember your KCF. Keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep my first fraction, change division to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. Now, I like to simplify first. Most of you guys don't, so I won't. I'm just going to multiply. 7 times 6 is 42. 10 times 5 is 50. I'm going to have to simplify it. What will go into 42 and 50? So I put it in my sled. I know 2 goes into it since it's even. and I get 21/25, and that is my answer, 21/25. So make sure you always simplify. Okay, number 9, it said what percent of the grid is shaded. I noticed that there were 25 boxes and 10 of them were shaded. So if I want to find percent's always out of 100. So I know I can multiply 25 times 4 to get 100. So whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So 10 times 4 is 40. So as I look at that, my answer is 40%, which was D. Number 10 was a word problem. It said you answered 15 out of 20 questions right. It's still percent. They're asking what percent you got. So I remember that percent's out of 100. This time I can multiply 20 times 5 to get 100. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 15 times 5 is 75. So my answer was, again, 75%, which is D. Make sure you turn this into me by Tuesday.